The year's 2006 and college football just peaked.
He's going for the corner. He's got it.
Two of the sport's biggest brands, with legends scattered across the field, gave us an absolute masterpiece. But for as incredible as it was, it also felt like the end, because when it was over, the stars were gone, and for the first time in a long time, the sport's power structure felt vulnerable. For years, a handful of programs controlled the sport. Down south, Virginia Tech was a constant threat. Florida State kickstarted the decade, and Miami was the power only a few years removed. Then there were the Western powers. Oklahoma was a constant title contender. Texas was the reigning champs, and USC stood as college football's current measuring stick. But now, those Southern powers were a shell of themselves, and the Western stars were gone. Meanwhile, hungry and dangerous contenders were building in the shadows, dying to get a chance to slay the giants. So the question going into 2006 was, who could take control of the sport? And as we entered September, we immediately got our first signal. USC may have lost their stars, but not their ability to make statements. They absolutely steamrolled Arkansas before dominating Nebraska to start the year. John David Booty looked like Leinert's heir apparent, paired with a terrific defense, and it felt like the path to the title remained out in Cali. Meanwhile, down south, it was another year of who could survive the SEC. Auburn and LSU entered as top 10 teams, while Florida and Tennessee were right behind them. The Gators were especially primed to take the next step. Urban was now in his second year with a savvy senior leader, along with an ultra-talented freshman class. Right off the bat, all the teams would lock horns, with Auburn surviving the first battle in a defensive slugfest over LSU. Florida was next up, inching by Tennessee in yet another one-score game between the rivals. But in this era, perfection was nearly a requirement, and the talent was deep, so it seemed likely the SEC powers would knock each other off. But just as things felt familiar, the winds of change started to blow. By week 3, one of the core Western powers already found themselves reeling after a heartbreaking loss in Oregon. Virginia Tech followed shortly after, falling to Calvin Johnson's soaring Yellow Jacket. Then came Florida State, who looked nothing like their former glory against Troy, before getting upset in heartbreaking fashion at Clemson. But the worst of all had to be Miami. Only a few years away from being the dynasty, they were now getting bullied. And by week 3, that Miami swagger was completely extinguished. One by one, the old powers were getting squashed, and in their place rose these newcomers, threatening the order of the sport. Louisville utterly dominated the Canes, not just overwhelming them on offense, but also stifling them on defense. West Virginia looked just as dangerous. In last year's Sugar Bowl, Pat White and Steve Slayton previewed they could be the real deal.
The Mountaineers of West Virginia will be the 2006 Nokia Sugar Bowl champions.
And in September, they proved it wasn't a fluke as they blitzed the competition. Then there was the Michigan Wolverines, a blue blood who had consistently fallen short over the past several years, suddenly made one of the loudest statements of the young season. In week 3, Michigan overwhelmed Brady Quinn and his second-ranked Fighting Irish in South Bend. The Chad Henne to Mario Manningham connection looked unguardable. Mike Hart was a machine, and the Michigan defense seemed like they could be a top unit in the country. But as those teams were fighting for positioning, Ohio State was gearing up to bypass everybody. For the past few years, the Buckeyes had the talent, but not the offensive firepower. In 2006, that all changed. Troy Smith was their most dynamic quarterback maybe ever, and Ted Ginn Jr. was now college football's most explosive athlete. But in order to take control of college football, they had to take out the champs, and in week 2, they got their shot. The Longhorns may have been led by a freshman, but they were still the reigning champs and the second-ranked team. Not to mention, they were the ones who knocked the Buckeyes off at the beginning of last year. But this year, it was time for revenge. Troy showed the Buckeye offense was more than just potential, while the defense overwhelmed a young McCoy. After 60 minutes, it looked like we had an early answer to who would take control of college football.
Hey folks, is that Ohio State came to Austin and messed with Texas.
And in October, Ohio State shifted into another gear. They already had that Longhorn statement win, plus a defensive masterclass against Penn State, and an offensive explosion at Iowa. Yet somehow, they became even more impressive in October. They were averaging 40 while allowing just 3 points a game. Troy Smith flew out to the front of the Heisman race. Ted Ginn Jr. was a threat to score whenever he touched the ball, and James Laurinaitis operated the scariest unit in the country. But as the Buckeyes looked like a shoo-in for one of the 2 top spots, those rising powers continued to make noise nearby. Brian Brahms' injury against Miami may may have limited the Cardinal offense, but their stout defense and a strong run game proved they were a complete team. Meanwhile, West Virginia's dynamic duo continued their onslaught. Pat White went superhuman against Syracuse, while Slayton put on a show against UConn. But only one would make it out alive of their impending November showdown. And even still, they needed the big brand names above them to fall off. Luckily for them, the SEC gauntlet is exactly what the doctor ordered. Auburn had climbed up to the second spot after their big LSU win, but there's no easy weeks in the SEC, which was a lesson the Tigers learned the hard way at the hands of Arkansas. Yes, that Arkansas team that got its doors blown off in week 1 had been fighting behind a young back named Darren McFadden, and that talented young sophomore shocked the sport by taking out the Tigers in convincing fashion.
Watch out! McFadden at the 25, 15, 5, touchdown!
That same week, the Gators jumped out as the SEC's most dangerous team with a monumental win against LSU. Not only did their defense look ferocious, but their rising freshman phenom looked like Urban's new secret weapon. But life in the SEC is like a pendulum, as the very next week, the injured Tigers rebounded and punched the Gators right back down the ladder. So just like that, the reigning powers found themselves right back in position to make a run. Texas had recovered by handling Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry before surviving a nail-biter at Nebraska. And USC was still at the top, determined to hold on to the throne, but cracks started to show in their foundation. Going into the month, they barely survived an unranked Washington State team, then had a close call versus Washington, before escaping Arizona State in the fourth quarter. The cracks were growing, and in Corvallis, the Beavers gnawed those cracks wide open. Oregon State jumped out to a 33-10 lead, shocking the Trojans. And when they finally woke up, their comeback attempt fell 2 points short, sending them tumbling in stunning fashion. But as USC fell, it wasn't the Big East rivals taking their place. Instead, it was Michigan soaring up the charts. Henny and Manningham dropped 31 on Michigan State. Their defense got them out of Happy Valley, and then Mike Hart grounded down the Hawkeyes. By the end of October, the Wolverines were looking like a true contender, a complete team that could stop the Buckeyes in their tracks. So for as impressive as Ohio State looked, their quest for control wasn't a guarantee. Those Big East threats looked as explosive as anyone, not to mention Michigan, who was waiting for them in a game for the ages.
Ohio State-Michigan collision. First ever 1 versus 2 collision in this rivalry.
Luckily for us, November threw us right into the action. The third-ranked Mountaineers visiting the fifth-ranked Cardinals. It had all the makings for offensive fireworks, but West Virginia quickly found out Louisville could do more than just score. After trading blows in the first half, the Cardinal defense took back a fumble before the special teams housed a punt to create separation. Pat White would mount a comeback attempt, but that separation was enough to hand Louisville the win and seemingly a clear path to the national championship. If they could just take care of business the following week in Piscataway, it'd be smooth sailing from there on out. Unfortunately for Louisville fans, the Scarlet Knights had something else planned entirely. To start, it was all Cardinals as they jumped out to a 25-7 lead, but Rutgers kept chopping behind Ray Rice while the defense settled in the second half. Somehow, Rutgers found themselves in a tie game late in the fourth with a chance to shock the sport, and they did exactly that as Jeremy Ito's field goal sailed through the uprights, sending fans rushing onto the field.
A fitting ending to Rutgers' biggest win ever.
But the Big East fun would wrap up shortly after. The very next week, Mike Teal threw 4 picks, sinking Rutgers' Cinderella story and the Big East's chances of taking the sport by storm. So as the Big East fell, the path cleared for a one-loss team. Texas was suddenly right back in the picture. Auburn too, only 1 spot behind them, and both Florida and USC still had an outside chance. But only 2 of them would make it out of November alive. Auburn was the first to go, falling victim to Matthew Stafford's first big win. Texas was next, getting stunned on the very same day in a thriller at Kansas State. With those 2 dominoes falling, the path was cleared wide open for either Florida or USC to make a push. Yet only one was looking like they had what it took for the final sprint. Coming off their Oregon State loss, the Trojans caught fire. They immediately rebounded with a 42-point blowout before stomping out ranked teams. That included beating Oregon by over 3 scores and then squashing a top 20 California team. USC was finally looking like a complete team team who could compete for the title. Meanwhile, the Gators looked anything but. To start the month, Chris Leak threw 3 picks as Florida almost blew it against Vandy. Then he threw another against South Carolina before Tim Tebow came in as their saving grace. Yet their defense allowed them to continue to find ways to win. But the whole sport was really waiting for one game, the game, a matchup between two hated rivals that likely decide the national champion, just like the 97 version did for Michigan and the 02 version did for Ohio State. Since then, the Buckeyes had owned the rivalry, upsetting Michigan in 2004 and earning a hard-fought win just 1 year ago. So now, it wasn't just a trip to the national championship on the line, but a chance for the Buckeyes to make it 3 straight, while the Wolverines had a chance to break it and win one for Bo. It was called the game of the century, and it delivered. In the first half, Ohio State's offensive explosiveness was on full display. Beanie Wells broke off for a 50-yarder. Ted Ginn broke loose in the second, and Troy Smith looked every bit like the Heisman favorite he was. Yet the Wolverines kept themselves within striking distance. But every single time they got close, the Buckeyes had an answer. Going into the fourth, it felt like Michigan could finally break through, especially when they got the ball back on a muff snap. But the Wolverine offense could just not get over the hump. Then, with just under 7 to go, it looked like they get one final shot, but a back-breaking penalty allowed Ohio State to keep marching, ultimately finishing that drive with the game-sealing touchdown. And just like that, the Buckeyes had survived an all-timer, punching their ticket to the title game. So going into December, Ohio State seemed to be the answer to the season-long question. For all those teams that threatened throughout the year, the Buckeyes were the ones back on top, and now more dangerous than they'd ever been before. Next to them stood USC, a team that got tested, but in true champion form, found a way to claw back into position. And after Michigan's loss, they took advantage of the golden opportunity by smashing 5th-ranked Notre Dame and snagging the 2nd spot outright for themselves. All they had to do was get by their 6-5 rivals, and they'd compete yet again for the national championship. But what was supposed to be a tune-up game turned into something else entirely. The Trojan offense, which looked unstoppable in November, suddenly stalled. For 3 quarters, they could not get their wheels turning. And after UCLA extended the lead in the 4th, the pressure to get the engine started skyrocketed. With only 5 minutes remaining, the Trojan dynasty needed the drive of a lifetime to avoid a historic collapse. The ball was in JDB's hands with an opportunity to immortalize himself. And after a massive 4th down conversion, it looked like he was going to finish the job. Then came that fateful 3rd down throw.
The senior backup linebacker from Carson, California.
Just like that, the dynasty crumbled, leaving a last-second opening in its wake. And no team was better positioned to take advantage than Florida. They sat in the 4th spot with 2 ranked wins, and now had a timely opportunity to add another. But it wouldn't be easy against now a top 10 Arkansas team. They'd been revived behind McFadden, who became the best back in the country. After leading them in that upset win over Auburn, McFadden took off with one massive performance after the next. If not for a brutal loss to LSU just weeks prior, the Razorbacks would also be playing for a shot at the title. So the Gators had their hands full, but when they needed their best game the most, they delivered. Specifically, Percy Harvin, who had a star-making performance. First, with a touchdown to jet out to an early lead before adding a nearly 70-yard dagger in the 4th, all while the Florida defense continued to show they were one of the toughest units in the sport. But even as SEC champs, the 2nd spot wasn't a guarantee. The win ignited debate over who deserved that 2nd spot. Both Florida and Michigan had key ranked wins, but Michigan had lost their last game, and Florida not only won it, but had also survived the toughest schedule in the country, which was enough to give that final spot to the Gators. Not everyone was happy.
Just my humble opinion, I still feel that Michigan is the 2nd best team in the country.
But the decision was final. So instead of who deserved it, the conversation pivoted to if Florida even stood a chance.
This is the team that few, if any, thought would be here. Do you feel like the underdog?
Because the Buckeyes were viewed as the far superior team. Their suffocating defense was led by the best defender in the country, while their offense, one built to overwhelm you, was led by the Heisman winner. In the pregame, the main broadcast focused on how the Gators could keep it competitive.
Ohio State averages nearly 40 points per game. They have weapons all over the field for quarterback Troy Smith. If you're Florida, how do you slow them down?
And as the game kicked off, it looked like those predictions would be right.
Again, down the sideline, will race to the end
zone.
But after Ted Ginn housed the opening kick, his own teammate took his ankles out, which meant the Buckeyes were without their best athlete going forward. And from there, the game turned into a full-blown Gator beatdown. Florida's defense was suffocating. It looked like they were playing at a different speed entirely. The constant pressure led to picks, fumbles, and ultimately a stat line that was hard to believe. Meanwhile, the Florida offense showed it was more than just tricks. They ran right through that exhausted Buckeye defense while putting on display the next wave of college football superstars. Florida may have started on the outside looking in, but they were the ones who took control of the sport with a blend of SEC speed, physicality, and talent that would be the new standard for years to come. So what do you guys think of the 2006 season? Did you see the SEC takeover coming, or were you just as shocked as some of the others? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you like this video, I think you'll love this next one up on the screen as well.